Okay. About a year ago, the highlight of my week was attending the hot yoga classes offered at my gym. After a long day of endless assignments and social interaction, I looked forward to heading to the warm and dimly lit studio to de-stress while listening to the calm ambient music. The class that I regularly took was called Flow, which consisted of slow movements and a calming instructor. One fateful Wednesday, as I attended the studio, I was told by an unfamiliar instructor that the class that I had signed up for that day was called Surrender. I thought nothing of it in the moment, but little did I know, the version of myself 45 minutes into the future was silently screaming at me to get out of there while I still could. Long story short, I was a sweaty, uncomfortable mess. And no, this was not a typical yoga class for me. There were no sequences and definitely none of the stretching that I was looking forward to. The entire class had actually consisted of 4 extremely difficult poses, each held for a long duration of time. Now, if it wasn't for my yoga instructor giving me the rudest awakening, I would have gone home, complained about my aches and pains to my mother, and never attended one of those yoga classes again. During the class, we were holding a particularly painful pose, and I just couldn't do it anymore, so I broke the pose. My yoga instructor noticed this, and then she addressed the class. If you're having trouble sitting through these poses, it may be an indicator that you're having difficulty sitting through negative emotions or situations in your own life. I didn't know it at the time, but this simple statement was an unexpected catalyst in my personal development. Of course, we've all heard the statement, get comfortable being uncomfortable. Usually when we think of this, we think of the big challenges, putting ourselves directly into uncomfortable situations, such as starting a new business, going to the gym 5 times a week, or cutting out carbs completely. But today, I want to create a space for us to explore the greatest discomfort of them all, our negative emotions. We can be led to true success through transforming and working through our suffering. It can be very difficult for us to embrace our past or emotions such as stress and fear. And many of us spend our time avoiding doing this in any capacity at all. We must also learn to let go of the notion that happiness is the key to fulfilling life. We need the dark in order to have the light. As we learn this, we come home to ourselves and are able to move forward with a newfound sense of strength and resiliency. Each and every one of us have pain, but each and every one of us have the skill set to transform our discomfort into something beautiful. This process is not linear, and it will last us a lifetime. Sometimes the river of life is clear, but other times it is so murky we cannot even see the bottom. We are only defined by how many times we keep going, despite the challenges and the pain that we face. I'm going to start by calling out a few of you, and of course this includes myself. The other day in my biology class, we students were discussing how we often got less than 5 hours of sleep because we felt the need to go on our phone at night to compensate for the stress that we were feeling throughout the day. Our biology teacher jokingly told us that this is how drug users start off. Doing things that they know are negative, but make them feel better temporarily. Now, I know this sounds a bit far-fetched, but in reality, he wasn't all that wrong. Many of us avoid our uncomfortable feelings through consumption, and this can be through alcohol, gossip, television, really anything you can think of. 9 out of 10 times, this actually amplifies our suffering even more. And many of us know that is wrong, but we continue to take part in it because we're hurting and we don't know why. As we do this, we lose ourselves in the process. And we find comfort in our discomfort. Another thing that I would like to touch on is falling victim to self-help books. Like many other people, I have purchased a multitude of self-help books. These books focus on becoming fitter, smarter, richer as quickly as possible. Claiming to have it all figured out, these books are actually quite harsh. Although they're a useful tool, we need to find a path that works for ourselves. When feeling pain, we actually suffer more in our minds than we do in our reality. Stress and fear are very real emotions, but how we feel them is based solely on our reaction. We magnify our pain with anger and despair. When we are presented with a stressful situation, such as failing a test or being rejected, we cause something called a reaction storyline. We imagine the ultimate disaster that has not even taken place yet, and we believe that we will never get through it if it does. We need to learn to focus on the smaller pain that is actually at hand, rather than condemning ourselves and obsessing over catastrophe. Anxiety and fear are 2 major emotions that come up when going through a painful experience. Many of us walk around holding on to useless fear about our future, and this can be a result of past experience or trauma. We are fearful to step outside of what we know as well, as we have collectively adopted the idea of pursuing comfort, ease, and convenience. Concrete, predictable, and stable does not mean winning the race of life. Before I learned about gratitude and presence, I was a true victim of holding on to my past, as many of us do. I felt extreme guilt, and I let my past define me. Many of us are exhausted from our past, and we don't pause to acknowledge that we have gone through something until out of nowhere it overwhelms us. Another issue many of us deal with is stress. Stress is said to be the silent killer of the 21st century, and 1 in 4 people, and according to Statistics Canada, 1 in 4 people report living in extreme daily stress. Stress is a normal biological reaction to potential danger, and when faced with a stressful situation, our brain floods our body with hormones and chemicals. When this happens too often, it no longer works in our favor. We have been conditioned to think that unhealthy stress is a sign of success, and that our goals cannot be achieved without it. But we all know that this is simply not true. Before we can learn to transform our difficult emotions to our advantage, we must embrace them and learn to hold space for them. Just as I held those poses in my yoga class, we must sit with our emotions first to accept them and to move forward. The first step to this is to let go of the notion that happiness is the be-all, end-all to life. There are thousands of books teaching us to be happier, so when we feel the opposite, we feel as though we are doing something wrong. By doing this, we resist our pain. Happiness, as well as suffering, is impermanent, and we cannot have one without the other. One way that I like to remember this is through the phrase, "No mud, no lotus." We cannot have the beautiful lotus without the dirty mud. Once we are able to release the notion that happiness is the path to a fulfilling life, we are able to accept our discomfort. Mindfulness is another way for us to embrace our heavy emotions. When we stop to take a conscious breath, we are able to draw our complete attention to the present moment. This happens when we unite our body and our mind, and we come home to ourselves. We learn to maintain a state of presence and peace, and find resiliency in difficult situations. We are also able to set the intention of emotional mindfulness and caring for ourselves. One way that I bring myself back to the present moment is by repeating, "No amount of guilt will change the past, and no amount of anxiety will change the future." This allows me to focus on the immediate present and solve the problem that's at hand. Practicing mindfulness on a daily basis can be extremely challenging, and like I said before, meditation is not the only way to do this. We can try habit stacking, as outlined in the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. For example, if you make a cup of coffee in the morning, you can take your mindful breaths while you wait for your coffee to brew. Over time, this mindfulness practice will become a habit, just as brewing your coffee is. We must also quit the bad habits that I mentioned earlier that disguise and distract us from our suffering, even if it's difficult. Many people try to rush this process, quitting entirely, but we should take it slow and do what works for ourselves. All that matters is that we meaningfully challenge ourselves a little bit more every single day, taking just a step in the right direction. Healing is not a linear or a quick process, and some of us may have valid reasons to hold on to our past, such as grief. The enormity and the rawness of our unresolved emotions will cause a disruption, and we must resist falling back into past negative patterns. When overwhelmed by anxiety or depression, many people feel like the only option is to give in or to run away. When we experience these negative emotions in full and hold space for them and be kind to ourselves, we are not giving in to them. We're using these emotions as a teacher instead of the enemy. When it comes to our past, we must also accept that we did the best with what we knew at the time. We can learn something from each and every difficult experience that we have had. Once we learn and realize that we cannot repair the treadmill while still running on it, we can step back and find acceptance and peace within ourselves. Self-love isn't just about loving yourself at your highs, but at your lows as well. After understanding our fears and our stress, we can begin to use them to our advantage. One exercise that I like to practice is writing down all my fears, and then beside them, writing down exactly what I would do if they were to happen. When we begin to face this fear head-on, we realize that there's always a way to reach our goals. By understanding that fear does not define us, we can also realize what we truly want out of life. Before understanding our emotions, we may not know if the path that we are currently on is one that is fulfilling our most important goals and our desires. We can now redefine ourselves, as well as the path that we are on. Each of us has a strong motivation and a passion that fuels us, and when it's a positive one, it can bring us true joy when pursued. We will not reach these goals without being resilient in the face of fear, though. It may be there, but we must learn to coexist with it and use it as our teacher. Stress can also be used to our advantage, and we must learn to allow it to healthily motivate us instead of control us. When we continuously do this, we foster a deep and personal sense that we can take on any challenge and be okay no matter the situation. When we know that we can work through difficult emotions, we cultivate a hope inside of ourselves that becomes like a small flame that we can revisit in times of turbulence. We can always make the conscious choice to have hope. If we continue to create a strong internal environment, hope will make achieving our dreams possible and allow us to overcome the limits that we have imposed upon ourselves. There's no guarantee that there will be a life without pain or suffering, and I hope that today in my talk I have taught you that they cannot exist without one another. We can let our past and emotions such as fear and anxiety transform us after we gently accept them and step out of our past behaviors. We accept these feelings through mindfulness and letting go, and transform them through moving forward, working with them, and cultivating our plans for the future. Ships don't sink because of the water inside of them. They sink because of the water around them. So next time you find yourself in a stressful situation, or maybe a hot yoga class, make sure you take a deep breath and surrender to your discomfort. Thank you.